Someone Like You by Sparkypasker. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 17. It took 2 days for Inko to discover the money was gone. Izuku had just gotten home from the gym. He walked through the front door of the apartment, turned around to shut the door, then turned back into the apartment and was preparing to take off his shoes when Inko stepped out of the living room. "Where is my money?" Inko asked quietly and calmly. The hairs on Izuku's arms raised. "I spent my money on my equipment, just like I said I was going to," Izuku responded. It was only partially a lie. He was certainly not going to tell her he had set up a new bank account and moved it all there. Even if she went online and saw an electronic transfer to a bank account in the Cayman Islands, there is no way she would know it was Izuku's own account and not him paying for his uniform. "I thought I ordered you to give up being a crime fighter," Inko seethed. "All I have ever wanted was to help people. I'm not going to stop just because you don't approve." A slap resounded throughout the apartment. Izuku's head was turned to the side and his cheek was bright red. A small cut from Inko's diamond wedding ring dribbled blood. Inko grabbed Izuku by his hair, threw him to the ground without letting go, and then dragged him behind her down the hall towards his room. Izuku screamed, but no help was coming. Their neighbors were not shy about voicing their dislike for Izuku. Rather than call the police, they were more likely to call the landlord to have him removed. It had happened before, back when he was a child and hadn't yet realized that screaming wouldn't do anything. Inko had used her feminine wiles and poor single mother acts to change the landlord's mind. After all, it would look bad for her if her hungry 5-year-old son was kicked out onto the street and he came across someone who might actually make a fuss about it. At least until those people found out he was quirkless, but they would take him back home and possibly yell at Inko before they found that out. And by that time, her reputation would be ruined. Izuku had learned his lesson by the time he was 6. Izuku saw a padlock screwed into his door and frame before he was thrown into his room. He felt each individual hair being pulled from his head. He slid across the hardwood floor. His spine rammed into the footboard of his bed. Izuku saw Inko's fury one last time before the door was slammed shut and the lock clicked shut. "You will never be a crime fighter." Inko's muffled voice traveled through the door. "Your only purpose in life is to be my cash cow. Better get used to it." Her footsteps resounded as she walked down the hallway to continue her day. Izuku laid on his floor in shock. He pushed himself up and carefully leaned back against the bed. He could already feel the bruise blossoming on his spine. Izuku had long ago come to the realization that Inko was emotionally and psychologically abusive. More recently, he had discovered she was financially as well, but Inko had never physically abused him. Or do those times she locked him out of the house count? Well, either way, she had never hit him before. Until she stole his money, he figured he would be able to put up with her treatment of him as long as he had the freedom to do what he wanted and had a place to sleep out of the elements. He had been hoping she wouldn't find out about the money until after he was gone, but obviously that didn't happen. Now he had 2 choices. He could stay in the apartment with Inko until his apartment was ready and try to survive her wrath. She had never used her quirk on Izuku, but he had studied it enough to know exactly what she was capable of. She was a nurse in the surgical unit. She had a license to use her quirk at work and would often be instructed by surgeons to remove objects and organs that would be too dangerous to remove by hand or tool. His other option would be to leave and live on the streets for a few days. Izuku's choice was obvious. He could survive on the street. Izuku grabbed his backpack from the back of his closet, packed enough clothes to get him through until he moved into the apartment and he could wash them, and stuffed his laptop and charger cord in between the clothes to cushion it. Good thing he didn't have any school supplies to take with him. The bag was full enough as it was. He wouldn't get his supplies list from St. Damian's for a few months yet. Inko had unknowingly given him one last gift by stopping him at the door. He still had his shoes on. He was also wearing the lightweight jacket he had worn to the gym. He had a heavier coat hanging in his closet. Izuku put it on. He wouldn't need it during the day, but it was still getting near freezing at night, so he would need it. After he was finished packing, Izuku opened the window to his room and looked down. He had never used it to leave before. He had never needed to. He could always just walk out the front door. He was on the 3rd floor. He had never even jumped from this height while running through his parkour route. It looked like he would be testing out the shoes then. Hatsume said they were impact absorbing. If they weren't, then he was going to end up with at least a fracture. It wouldn't be the first time. He would be uncomfortable for a few weeks, but it wouldn't be too bad. Izuku tossed his backpack down first, making sure it would land closed first to protect the laptop from the impact of the fall. It landed with a thud. Izuku froze. Inko didn't come back, and no one from below opened up their windows. It's possible they looked out their windows, but didn't see anything, or maybe the neighbors were at work. Their neighbors were mostly elderly, but they could be out doing anything. That made Izuku wonder why Inko wasn't at work, but decided it wasn't his problem anymore, and considering her attitude recently, she probably quit when she saw Izuku was making enough money for her to live off of. Izuku jumped out the window and landed firmly on his feet, knees bent in a crouch. His eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't felt a thing. Well, now he knew he could jump from at least 3 stories high and land safely. He collected his bag and walked out of the neighborhood calmly. If he ran like he wanted to, it would be suspicious, and the last thing he wanted was someone telling Inko he was out before he had the chance to get away. It had been a full 24 hours since Inko put Izuku in a timeout. That should be plenty of time for him to calm down and get that silly notion of crime fighting out of his head. He should have known he wasn't good for anything more than making her money. In fact, Inko was kind enough to have found Izuku another job. She had contacted a friend of hers who specialized in finding work for people with less than desirable quirks. She had known him since high school. Giran was such a little shit, but even in school, he could always find the perfect person for any job. She was going to talk to him about it as she walked him to work that day. He never told her where he was working, so she needed to find out anyway to make sure he would always go. After all, he doesn't get paid if he doesn't show up. Inko took the padlock key out of her pocket and unlocked the door. She froze in shock when she opened the door. Izuku's window was open and he was gone. Inko wanted to force herself to believe that he had been kidnapped, but she knew that wasn't the case. She knew her son and how stubborn he could be. He had escaped on his own, but he couldn't have gotten away without hurting himself. This was the 3rd floor. He probably fractured his foot or ankle jumping out the window. He knew better than to go to any hospital or doctor, so he was probably holed up somewhere waiting for it to heal. She will just have to see if the police will help her find him. If she cries enough, there is no doubt he would be home by nightfall. Inko paused outside her neighborhood police station. It had always been easy for her to cry. That particular ability had helped her many times throughout her life. If she ever got a bad grade in school, her tears were her way of getting her grades up. Her classmates had to sleep with the teacher, but she was far above that. Her friend Mitsuki always admonished her for putting down the girls that did, but really, who could blame her for just saying that what everyone was thinking? Inko walked through the front door of the station, tears in her eyes and a handkerchief clutched between her hands. Please, officer, you have to help me. My son is missing, she said quickly, a quiver in her voice. I think he was kidnapped. We live on the third floor of our building, and his door was locked. I opened the door with my quirk, and he was gone. And his window was open, so he had to have been kidnapped. Please, you have to help me." Inko's cries became louder and more frantic as she told her story. "Ma'am, calm down. When did you notice your son missing? And when did you last see him?" "This morning. I saw him yesterday morning. He came home from the gym and went straight to his room and didn't come out the rest of the night. Not even for supper." "Would you say this was unusual for your son?" "Yes, definitely. He's such a good boy. He always greets his mother when he comes home." "I don't think he was kidnapped then. If he was acting out of character, he probably had some friends of his help him run away. I'm sure he will be back soon. Unfortunately, we can't investigate missing persons until it has been at least 48 hours since they had been seen." "But you see, my son, he's quirkless. He doesn't have any friends and wouldn't have been able to fall that far without being hurt." "Oh, well, if that's the case, you should just give up then." Inko's tears dried up in an instant. "What?" she asked in a monotone. "Yeah, he's probably already dead. And if someone did take him alive, he's not going to be for long. Quirkless sold on the black market to some foreigners don't last long. It's best just to cut your losses now." Inko stormed out of the police station, grieving mother's facade forgotten. If the police won't help her, she will just have to find someone else. Maybe she would give Hazashi a call. Tsukashi walked into the precinct, nearly colliding with the angry green-haired woman leaving. He watched her leave as he walked up to the front desk. "Is everything okay?" he asked. The officer looked up at Tsukachi, then toward the door where Tsukachi's attention was focused. "Yeah, everything's fine. She was just mad that we couldn't help her find her lost dog. I told her she needed to go to animal control. I know a lot of people treat their pets like their children nowadays, but this is ridiculous." "Ah," Tsukachi acknowledged, then tilted his head slightly to the right. "Don't you think she looked like that kid who came in for the crime fighter's license a couple days ago?" "Maybe." The officer scrunched up his eyebrows. "Really, the only thing I noticed about the kid was his hair and eye color, and I suppose those are the same. But I could say the same thing about you and I. We have the same hair and eye color, but as far as I know, we aren't related." Tsukachi hummed. The officer was right, but he couldn't help but feel there was something going on. Unfortunately, he didn't have any evidence to say there was, so he tucked the idea into the back of his mind and went back to his office to try to put a dent in the pile of paperwork sitting on his desk. Chapter 18. Izuku ran out of the alley he had slept in. He was being chased by a low-ranked hero trying to make him out to be a villain just because he wasn't sleeping under a roof. It was early in the morning. The sun had barely begun to rise above the rooftops. Izuku heard yelling coming from behind him. The hero was gaining on him. Izuku ducked into the next alley. He saw a fire escape pulled down and immediately started climbing. Quirks may have changed many things in humans over the centuries, but one thing that had not changed is the propensity not to look for anything above the level of the eyes. Izuku crouched down once on the rooftop, the tips of his hair barely visible above the railing. Izuku heard the hero run into the alley. "Damn kid, where did he go? We can add illegal quirk usage to his list of crimes." Izuku rolled his eyes, but kept quiet. He heard the hero grumble, but left the alley empty-handed. He followed the hero from above. He wasn't going to be stupid enough to go back down and leave the alley only to bump into the hero. The hero turned left out of the alley and started walking. Izuku watched the hero until they rounded the corner. Only then did he move. It was still too dangerous to travel at ground level, but the gym was only a couple blocks away. This was the reason Izuku slept in that alley to begin with. He could use the gym for personal hygiene after his normal workout, then grab something from a vending machine on his way to work. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to sleep in that alley again. He wasn't caught this time because the hero was loudly talking to himself and didn't care about silencing his footsteps whatsoever. But that doesn't mean a quieter hero won't catch him next time, and he was positive that the good-natured hero would escort him back to that hell they would call his home. Maybe he would check out that trash heap by the ocean. He had seen some homeless people sleeping there before. There was enough junk around that it should be able to hide him from the heroes and elements, but some people in general can be very territorial, especially those with animal mutation quirks. Unfortunately, most of the homeless population in this city had mutation quirks. It would be a toss-up if anyone had claimed the beach or not. He would just have to see when he got there. Izuku walked into the cafe and said hello to Uraraka, then began to clean and make the different brewed coffees. The day continued on like any other. For some reason, there were always fewer people requesting consultations on Fridays, so it allowed Izuku to help Uraraka out more. Izuku had done a quick consultation with her one day while they were working and between customers. She mentioned how she always had some nausea after using her quirk for too long, or after trying to use it on something that was too heavy. Izuku suggested trying to use it constantly on items that were lightweight and keep it on for a little longer every day. So, after getting permission from Boss, Uraraka began floating orders in the air while waiting for people to pick them up. In the past, there had been people accused of stealing orders, so normally one of them had to physically hand the order to the recipient instead of just putting it on the counter. Even if it was only 30 seconds, it took time away from being able to help the next person. So, by floating it high in the air, they could prevent theft and still be able to help the next person. Not to mention, Boss was able to market it as a show. Some people came in specifically to watch Uraraka float coffee and pastries across the cafe. They even began to attract a younger crowd. It was like magic for the public, ignoring the fact that magic of the past was literally quirks of the present. "Hey, Midoriya, are you okay?" Uraraka asked as she floated a pastry over to a table. "You haven't really said a whole lot today." "I'm fine," he responded. The dark roast had been popular that day, and Izuku needed to brew more. "I can tell you're lying. You're not fine." She spoke softly. "You have a bruise on your cheek, and I can see the cut. You have been trying to hide it from people all day by focusing on making orders and keeping your head down, but I saw it." Izuku stopped what he was doing and held his hand to his cheek. "I don't have any concealer to cover it up, so I knew I wouldn't be able to hide it. But no one else said anything, so I figured it wasn't that bad." Izuku steps closer to Uraraka, back still to the counter. "I know we don't know each other well, but can I trust you?" he asked. "Probably not," she said, "because, as you said, we don't know each other well." Izuku laughed quietly. "That's true, so I won't tell you everything, but I will tell you a little." Izuku twiddled with his fingers for a few moments before finally speaking. "My mother doesn't approve of my career choice. She wants me to just work every day in this cafe for the rest of my life so that I can support her. I didn't find that out until recently, though, when I went to check my bank account and found all my money gone. I questioned her about it, and she said it was her money, so she could use it how she pleased. Then she slapped me and called me her cash cow. I ran away last night and slept in an alley. I'm glad I have a gym membership, though, so I could at least take care of my personal hygiene." "If she took all your money, what have you been eating?" she asked, eyes wide. Izuku tilted his head to the side. "I have skipped meals before. It's not too bad." "I have too, but that doesn't mean it's good." "Why have you skipped meals then?" She smiles at Izuku sheepishly. "My family owns a construction company, but have never done really well. We have been poor for as long as I can remember. We can't really compete with the larger companies. I would skip meals so that my parents could pay our rent. I always told them I ate a big meal at school or was feeling sick, something like that, so that they wouldn't waste their food on me." "Do your parents live around here, or do you commute to work?" "No, I moved here by myself for school. My parents live in a small town almost 10 hours north of here. I'm going to go to UA. I found a cheap apartment a little ways from here, and I can actually afford it with this job. Did your parents rent the apartment for you? No, the complex I found didn't really ask any questions, and they didn't seem to care that I'm underage. That seems sketchy. I'm walking you home tonight before I find a place to stay. Uraraka laughed loudly. I'm fine. I can walk myself home. I'm going to be a hero after all. But you're not a hero yet. What if you get uncomfortable walking in an area that might have a lot of villains? My family's construction company actually hires a lot of people with villainous quirks and even people with no quirks at all. That's one of the reasons why we don't do as well as our competitors. Some people think the buildings made by our company are cursed, but my parents do some of the best work I've ever seen, Uraraka said excitedly. Then she looks at the ground guiltily. We can pay our workers less because of their quirks, but that means we can afford to buy better materials. I hope you don't think we are cruel to take advantage of them like that. Just from working with you, I can tell you're the type of person to look past quirks. But my parents make the same amount of money our workers do, she added quickly. I don't think you're cruel. Actually, you are role models, he said with a smile. They hire anyone, no matter their quirk status, and don't underpay their employees while at the same time stuffing their pockets. In fact, by using better materials, you are probably allowing your employees to work longer without being laid off. If you both had employees with undesirable quirk status and subpar construction, your business would have closed long ago and all of your employees would be out of a job. Well, and that's why I'm not worried about walking alone. I grew up around outcasts. People with villainous quirks and villains are not the same thing. I'm still going to walk you home. Izuku and Uraraka walked out the front door after their shift, Boss locking the door behind them. They walked down the street in silence, Uraraka leading the way. Izuku obviously didn't know where she lived, so it wasn't like he could do much more than follow her. It kind of made walking her home seem silly, but if anyone jumped out at them, he could just jump in front of her before anything happened. He followed her as she entered the train station and swiped her pass, while Izuku purchased a ticket. This reminded Izuku that he may need to purchase a monthly pass. He could just run to work every day, but it is quite far. He would have to just go on a run one day and see how it goes. Izuku paused momentarily before getting on the train. Uraraka looked at him. Are you coming? She asked. Yeah, Izuku said slowly. He happened to notice that the train they were getting on was leading straight to Southern Mustafa. He sat down in the seat next to Uraraka, trying to hide his concern. She didn't really think it was necessary for Izuku to walk her home to begin with, but Izuku thought differently now that he knew where she would live. They got off the train in Southern Mustafa and began walking, deeper than Izuku had gone when he bought his cell phone. As they turned down street after street, Izuku looked at the signs and became more curious. He hummed as he followed Uraraka up a flight of stairs and down the hall to her door. They passed the man with a badger mutation, grumbling as he carried a box down the way they had come. Izuku stopped at the door next to hers. Huh, well, that's an interesting coincidence. What is? Uraraka asked, unlocking her door. This is the apartment I'm supposed to be moving into on Monday. What? They heard a yell from behind them. They turned to look at the man they had passed on their way to the apartment. You're the quirkless freak that's getting me kicked out of my apartment? He sneered. The man lunged at Izuku. If I kill you, I won't have to move, he yelled. Izuku braced himself for impact, planning to sweep the man's legs out from underneath him and toss him over the end of the balcony. They were only on the second floor, so the fall shouldn't do much more than knock the wind out of him and maybe break a bone or two, depending on how he landed. But it wouldn't kill him by any means. Before he had even gotten close enough to scratch Izuku, he was surrounded by a blue light and pulled backwards, towards the stairs. Within a second, the Badger Man's back slammed into the end of a metal rod, and he was slammed onto the floor. Beating up the kid isn't going to stop your sorry ass from being on the street. You should have been using your paycheck to pay your rent instead of for drugs and women. The woman who spoke had short brown hair, and her eyes were hidden by a pair of dark sunglasses. She used her broad shoulders and thick arms to easily pick the badger up off the ground and held him by the collar. She opened the door to Izuku's new apartment and threw him inside. Get your crap and get out. She stood at the door, blocking the man from being able to leave. Hey there, kiddies, she said cheerfully with a wide smile. I'm the building manager. You can call me Big Sis Magna. If you have any questions, just let me know. I will take care of them for you. The smile turned mischievous, and Magna slammed her right fist into her left palm. Izuku and Uraraka laughed at Magna's antics. Thank you, Izuku told her, turning around and following Uraraka into her apartment. Izuku's smile dimmed slightly when he shuts Uraraka's door behind him. So, she said slowly, you're quirkless? Ah, yeah. I guess you were just being nice before then. You must really think I'm a horrible person, huh? She said sadly. My answer hasn't changed as long as your opinion of me hasn't. Uraraka looked at Izuku in surprise, then broke out in a cheeky grin. Nah, you're still a cool guy, and smart to boot. I can't wait to be your neighbor. Izuku felt a warmth grow in his chest, and he smiled wide. Thanks, he said. It's no problem. Uraraka had a thoughtful look. You know what? We both work tomorrow. Why don't you stay the night? In fact, if you want, you can stay until your apartment is available. I don't have a couch or really any furniture other than my futon, Uraraka pointed out, but I have a lot of blankets. Izuku took that opportunity to look around. Indeed, the apartment was barren except for a futon rolled up in the corner of the loft-style apartment and a pair of blankets next to it. Her clothes were folded up in a couple suitcases along the wall. There was a small row of cabinets along the back wall, which also contained a sink, combination oven and stove, and a refrigerator. The counters were empty. There was an open door off the kitchen. Izuku could see some white tile inside the room, so assumed it was the bathroom. He wondered if, considering the state of the rest of the apartment, her refrigerator was also nearly empty. I don't know. I wouldn't want to impose, or possibly take some much-needed blankets from her. It was still April. It could get cold at night, and these apartments didn't have the best insulation. You walked me home. It's the least I can do, especially now that I understand a little more what's going on. I want to be your friend, and I can't let a friend sleep out in the cold. End of chapter.